Welcome to Nevada Newsmakers. On the program today, you've heard about those Predator drones over Iraq and Afghanistan that we have. Well, a lot of the work on those are done right here in Nevada. We'll talk about it. Plus, what happens when you're working for Secretary of Transportation Norm Mineta and 9/11 occurs and the whole system gets shut down? We'll talk about that too. So on the program today, Captain Dave Roy Rogers, who's in charge of experimental aircraft here in the Silver State, and Michelle Poche, who is Assistant County Manager for Washoe County. And for the Power Pundit panel today, we've got the fire extinguishers standing by, Earlene Forsythe, Chris Wicker, and Pat Coward. It's all coming up next on an all-new Nevada Newsmakers.
Nevada Newsmakers, brought to you in part by the Tahoe-Reno Industrial Center, the world's largest industrial park, the resort at Red Hawk, and the Peppermill family of casinos.
High-tech companies demand perfect world amenities. They require clean, reliable power, state-of-the-art fiber optic communications, and clean water sources. In a perfect world, companies would have immediate access to rail and interstate freeways. There would be 4-lane expressways that shorten shipping times and provide convenient commute routes for valued employees. Well, the future is now, and it's here. Welcome to the Tahoe-Reno Industrial Center, the largest industrial park in the world, building economic prosperity for Nevadans.
When making your decision as where to play golf, consider the resort at Red Hawk. You know you have made the right choice the moment you arrive. The friendly staff welcomes you to our award-winning pro shop. You know you've made the right decision on the first tee. The Lakes course is in the best condition in years. You know you've made the right choice after you've played 18 holes. The resort at Red Hawk, the right choice.
Nevada Newsmakers is sponsored in part by the Nevada Beer Wholesalers Association.
As an employer, did you know you can be held liable for negligent hiring? A background screening by Employer Links can uncover criminal records, like alcohol and drug convictions. It can verify the applicant's education, driving records, and professional licenses. Employer Links can check civil records, registered sex offender records, and Social Security fraud. Hiring the right person shouldn't be a gamble. Call Employer Links. Employer Links, protecting your investment.
I tell you, John, this industry has really changed.
Tell me about it.
You seem to do pretty well last year. What's your secret?
No secrets. Although I'll tell you something. The smartest thing I did was sign up with Pro Group Management.
Really? Yeah, they do workers' comp, right?
Yeah, their services are great. And get this, they saved me 30%. I've heard they saved others 50%.
That works for me.
Pro Group Management. Finally, workers' comp that works for you.
And now, back to Nevada Newsmakers with Sam Shad.
And we welcome to the program an old friend of mine, Captain Roy Rogers, former base commander at Fallon from 1998 to 2001, and he assumed command of the OSD-sponsored Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Joint Task Force in October of 2001, and in that capacity he spent time in the Middle East during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's start out with, explain to us what this Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Joint Task Force is.
Well, essentially, the Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Joint Task Force is a group of people sponsored by the Office of the Secretary of Defense to work on integrating all the service unmanned aerial vehicles tactically. So we're very much at the tactical level. We've all deployed in the last 3.5 years. We're based out of Fallon, Nevada, but it's a team of people running around developing tactics for joint utilization of UAVs, very much leaning forward with the equipment that we have.
Things like the Predator would come under you?
Exactly. We deal with about 8 or 9 different unmanned aerial vehicles. There's about 20 or so different kinds of unmanned aerial vehicles out there, and we're working very closely with all 4 services, not just the Navy at Fallon.
Captain, with the rise in technology, these unmanned vehicles and the drones and things like that, do you foresee a day when the Top Gun flight school is irrelevant because most of these things, most of the airborne weapons will be controlled on the ground, remote control?
We see a day when there will be more of that. I can't see a day, neither can other people in this business, where we're going to completely replace the man or human in the airplane. There are some tactical things that just require that on-scene, in the aircraft flexibility that a human brings. Now, there is a large percentage of activity that we currently do in airplanes that can be transferred to another location. The number one thing that a UAV brings you is persistence over the battlefield. And you just can't have a human being in a cockpit for 20 to 30 hours, which is what we're doing with some of these UAVs now. And that's the most attractive thing. The other thing, obviously, is not hazarding the human in the cockpit. And we're going to move to do that. We already have. We have airplanes that are flown from 7,000 miles away, controlling things overseas.
I was kind of curious. There was a Predator spy plane that ran out of fuel and crashed in Southwest Asia on January 14th. How does something like that happen?
Well, essentially, there's, without getting into too many of the details there, Sam, because some of that's classified, in some cases, we've had to sacrifice those airplanes because the mission was of such a critical importance that we made a conscious decision to work the very edge of the envelope, reference fuel consumption and stuff like that. And so, without getting too specific about the incident that you brought up, there was some of that involved in it.
What was the cost to the taxpayer, Captain, for these drones that were the one in Southeast Asia that was lost?
Well, the cost is a relative term. If you take the entire system and amortize it over the lifespan of that system, the cost of these systems is anywhere between $3 and $5 million a piece. You chalk that sounds like a very high number.
It sure does.
It is a very high number, but you add that up versus the cost of a manned aircraft or the cost of putting somebody in harm's way, and that becomes almost incalculable.
Let's talk about money. $85 million earmarked for military projects, and that includes expanding the Predator base, correct?
Well, essentially, the number, and you're very familiar with military construction and how all that works, Sam, the number that's out there is a large number, let's just put it that way, and it is earmarked for development in the state of Nevada for unmanned aerial vehicles primarily. There are some other things that are going into primarily Indian Springs down there by Nellis that are not UAV related, but let's put it this way, the capital investment by the United States and specifically the Air Force in UAVs in Nevada is a large number.
And you're seeing an expansion of the Indian Springs facility, correct?
Yes. What they're going to do is create a joint UAV Center of Excellence at Indian Springs. They've already got an Air Force Center of Excellence. Our organization has migrated down there right now from Fallon, so we've kind of moved out from Fallon to Indian Springs, our activity. And we're looking to do a lot more joint activity at Indian Springs.
We've got less than a minute, but I wanted to bring up something that we really haven't heard an awful lot about. Last week, Admiral James Stockdale passed away, and most people would remember him as Ross Perot's running mate, but in fact, he was truly a great American hero, was he not?
Oh, yes. I mean, Admiral Stockdale was known and loved by just about everybody in uniform as a surviving prisoner of war during Vietnam, and in fact won the Medal of Honor for his activities as the senior POW in Vietnam. I know you know Ray Alcorn is one of our local guys, was one of my predecessors out at Fallon as the base commander there. He was over there with Admiral Stockdale. And I don't think the American public completely grasps it all the time, but if you're identified as the senior guy in a prisoner of war situation, you're going to bear the brunt of their torture and activity. So that was an extremely heroic job that he did when he was over there.
And it's a pleasure to have you here. We would welcome you to come back because there's so much more we want to talk to you about.
That's great.
Pleasure to have you here.
Thanks,
Roy
Sam.
Rogers. We'll be right back on Nevada Newsmakers after this.
For a videotape copy of any Nevada Newsmakers program, call 775-857-2244. The tapes are $20 each, including shipping.
My family started this business 27 years ago. We work hard to serve our customers and our community.
But it's getting harder and harder to keep the doors open.
For example, our workers' comp is going through the roof. Isn't anyone on my side anymore?
The Retail Association of Nevada is. If you're a small business owner, we can cut your workers' comp by up to 50%, lobby for your interests, and keep you informed. Put us to work today.
Many of the materials we rely on every day come from the ground, and modern mining technology brings them to us cleaner and safer than ever before. To learn more about America's natural resources, visit nma.org, the National Mining Association.
If it's fun, it's here at the Peppermill, the $100,000 video-themed slot celebration, with more winners each week, 100 random winners every Monday and Wednesday, and more cash prizes, $6,000 random drawings every Friday, plus chances to win up to $1,000 in free slot play on Mr. Money's Challenge. You'll have more fun with the Peppermill's video-themed slot celebration, now worth over $100,000.
The slots that rock are at the Peppermill. Where are you winning?
Your best value in sight is here for you to see. From frames to lenses to eye exams, you're covered A to Z. Davis Optical, your best value in sight.
Davis Optical Centers, with 2 locations in Reno and Sparks.
Davis Optical, your best value in sight.
And now, back to Nevada Newsmakers with Sam Shad.
And we're joined on the broadcast by Michelle Poche, who's the Assistant Washoe County Manager, but we're not here to talk about Washoe County today. We're here to talk about your time working with Secretary of Transportation Norm Mineta when 9/11 occurred. Tell us what happened, where were you, and what was the reaction when you first heard that 9/11 had occurred?
I was in a staff meeting, and someone broke into the meeting, apologized for the interruption, and explained that a plane had just struck the World Trade Center, and we all imagined it was a Cessna gone wrong, which would still be a problem because we were in charge of planes. I went and turned on CNN and saw the magnitude of the damage, and everyone from the staff meeting got up and immediately went to their departments because we knew we were going to spend the rest of the day responding to what we thought was an accident. We started pulling our intel information together as well, and I was actually on the phone with the White House giving them an update on what we knew so far as I watched the second plane strike on CNN. And I'm on the phone with Andy Card's office saying, "Are you catching this? We got a second plane." And as you and every other American knows, that was the moment our world changed. And then it turned into a really bad day.
What were your thoughts on seeing first of all, seeing the second plane going in?
I realized that the first one wasn't an accident, as we all did, and that we needed to start moving quickly. We began trying to assess how many other planes we had in the air that could be a threat, and we were on the phone. We were coordinating between FAA ops and the airlines themselves, trying to track every plane in the sky and get a call back from every plane in the sky to figure out who wasn't responding, to figure out which ones might be threats. And until we were able to assess that, there was a period of time where we thought we could have as many as a dozen planes out of control, and then we were finally getting calls back from all the flight crews and taking them off. But it took some time. It took some time.
And then when the Pentagon plane crashed?
I was briefing the Chief of Staff on the situation. Our press secretary walked into the room with his cell phone to his ear and said, "My wife was just driving by the Pentagon and she saw an explosion." I mean, we were at the core of everything, and yet we were still getting our information in informal ways because of the fog of war. Ran to the window, saw the smoke and the flames, and then we had our hands full with trying to get the secretary moving. He was called over to the White House and was down in the bunker with Vice President Cheney managing the operations of the incident from the point that we knew Washington was under attack, as well as New York.
What was the reaction of the employees at the Department of Transportation? Was it strictly business at that point, or was emotion coming into play?
It was a very difficult time for our employees. We were evacuating the city. We were under attack. So I was trying to get most of our employees out of the building and home, and managing an evacuation of the employees, trying to tell them, you probably want to stay off the highways because they're going to be clogged because everyone's evacuating the city. Try to take Metro instead. Then we were getting false reports of explosions in Metro stations. There was a false report of a car bomb at the State Department. So there was a lot of chaos going on. Some of it was even being reported over CNN, even though it was inaccurate and hadn't been confirmed. So our employees were really frightened, and that was something that extended far beyond the day of 9/11. If you move back in time and remember what that time was like, we as a nation were pretty frightened for a long time after 9/11. Add to that, if you're working in Washington, D.C., we then had anthrax in our mail. And the post office that served our department was closed. People were dying who worked in the post office that served our office. So our employees were under a tremendous amount of stress, and they rose to the occasion, and they fulfilled their duties and took their job really seriously. I was proud to work with them.
What was it like when the entire system was shut down?
It was unprecedented. We'd never closed down U.S. airspace like that. And when Secretary Mineta made the call, it was a difficult call to make. He was actually sitting in the bunker at the White House across the table from Vice President Cheney, and he was on the phone with FAA getting the reports, and he made the call. He said, I want all the planes brought down, every plane in the sky I want landed. The FAA person came back to him and said, well, sir, the system really isn't designed to do that. We could work through pilot discretion. The Secretary interrupted him in mid-sentence and said, forget pilot discretion, I want every plane down. And Vice President Cheney gave him a nod, and the planes came down. And it was a great success because every airport in the country had to do whatever it took to absorb those planes. We had more planes on the ground than we had gates. Planes were lining up on airfields all across the country. The Canadian government was wonderful. They allowed us to land all kinds of planes in these little tiny towns, and we're unloading our passengers. And people in small towns in Canada were opening up their homes and letting the passengers spend the night on their couches until they could figure out what they were going to do next. So the whole world really came together to support us.
Last question for you. What was your response, your personal response, when you heard about the London bombings last week?
It was a reminder to me that everything we were doing when I was in Washington, D.C. was correct. I think for a lot of people, 9/11 was one day or a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months. But for the people who are responsible for making the policies and the regulations that protect all of us, it hasn't ended yet. And it's something that the people I used to work with in Washington are still dealing with every day. Every day they're wondering whether or not we need to be worried about something like that happening here. And every day they're taking actions to keep us all safe. And I'm really grateful that I had the honor to work with those folks because they're doing a great job.
Michelle Poche, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll be right back on Nevada Newsmakers after this. Great story.
This is Nevada Newsmakers.
For more than a decade, the Southern Nevada Water Authority has been helping the community embrace conservation as a way of life. That includes replacing more than 50 million square feet of grass with water-smart landscaping. During the worst drought on record, watering restrictions and tough landscaping codes have reduced the community's water use by billions of gallons, even as thousands of new residents were moving into Nevada. That's smart water management, and that's our promise to Nevada.
When making your decision as where to play golf, consider the resort at Red Hawk. You know you have made the right choice the moment you arrive. The friendly staff welcomes you to our award-winning pro shop. You know you've made the right decision on the first tee. The Lakes course is in the best condition in years. You know you've made the right choice after you've played 18 holes. The resort at Red Hawk, the right choice.
So, who do you use for workers' comp?
Pro Group Management.
Ah, I've heard some good things about them.
You bet. Employee background checks, safety training, claim seminars. Oh, and here's the great part. If you have an issue, they work for you, not against you.
Sounds perfect. And expensive.
Well, that's the best part. They saved me 30%. I've heard they've saved others 50%.
Works for me. Pro Group Management. Finally, workers' comp. that works for you.
As an employer, did you know you can be held liable for negligent hiring? A background screening by Employer Links can uncover criminal records, like alcohol and drug convictions. It can verify the applicant's education, driving records, and professional licenses. Employer Links can check civil records, registered sex offender records, and Social Security fraud. Hiring the right person shouldn't be a gamble. Call Employer Links. Employer Links, protecting your investment.
And now, back to Nevada Newsmakers with Sam Shad.
And we're joined by our Power Pundit panel today, and we have a fabulous one for you. Pat Coward is here with Carrera, Nevada. Earlene Forsythe, who's the chairman of the Nevada Republican Party. Welcome to the program for your first appearance. We're glad to have you here. And Chris Wicker, chairman of the Washoe County Democratic Party. Chris, aren't you getting a little frustrated that, you know, after all these years of being called tax and spend liberals, we now have tax and spend conservatives? Are they stealing your lines?
It actually drives you crazy, because the tax and spend liberal, I think, was appropriate back in the 60s and 70s. But now it's just crazy, because you do find yourself in the situation of complaining about the Republican deficit and complaining about different of the spending programs of George Bush. Even a lot of conservatives are complaining about some of those spending. So it's a role reversal, but it really hasn't been tax and spend liberals except on the extreme left for decades, I don't think.
Earlene?
Well, I think when it comes to Nevada, you have to look at the history of Nevada. And in 1955, when you had Governor Russell, he was a Republican, and he did increase our taxes. Also, Laxalt and Governor Gwynn. But remember, we've had 20 years of Democrats, so we have to come and clean up because of all their spending. So it's very important.
So you do that by spending more?
Yeah, but you know, one thing you have to look at here that I think is very important, in fact, I think it just came out, a huge reduction in the deficit right now, and I think they contributed a lot of that to some of the tax cuts that the Republican governor has made.
Mm-hmm. Some of the tax cuts? What are you talking about? There was a minor payroll tax cut, and that's about it.
I think he reduced taxes on the death penalty. I mean, not the death penalty, but the inheritance tax, and some of these all the way back.
You're talking about the president?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah. You know, and in fact, there was an editorial today in the Las Vegas Review-Journal, which quoted, "A steady economy bolstered by Republican tax cuts has increased central government revenues to the point where the White House is now projecting this year's federal budget deficit will drop to $333 billion, nearly $100 billion below estimates." And the interesting thing is, and I'm quoting here, Chris, as for the endless Democratic braying that the Bush tax cuts only favor the rich, corporate tax revenue has soared above about 40%, and most of the increase comes from higher stock market gains and the business income of relatively wealthy taxpayers. So maybe the president is turning out to be a little bit right on this?
No, absolutely not. And I'll tell you why. First of all, that's the Review-Journal editorial. And I have my own feelings about that. But secondly, the facts is that the tax cuts clearly favored the wealthy. You look at the dividend tax cut, favored those that had all the passive income, which clearly favored the wealthy. The income tax, the top 1% got a huge percentage of any available tax cut. The Republicans, what the Republicans call the death tax, which is really an estate tax, and it's an estate tax because it only taxes the top 4 to 7%. And so you have needy families like the Gates and the Rockefellers and the Buffetts, getting this great tax break. If that's not a tax break for the wealthy, then I must be crazy, because it's clearly a tax break for the wealthy. That part is debatable
anyway.
Well, when you're talking about the tax breaks, you have to look at the economy, and our economy is stimulating, and you look at what we're doing in the last 14 quarters, and it's been up. Our economy is just, out there booming. And look at the jobs. We've created, 1.1 million jobs this year alone.
Yeah, let's look at the economy. We've gone from a surplus of potential trillions of dollars to hundreds of billions of dollars of deficit spending, as far as the eye can see. That's a product of these tax cuts for the wealthy. You have just amazing concept that, let's put it this way, all the Nobel laureates in economics when these tax cuts were being proposed, said, no, this is the wrong way to stimulate the economy. If you want to stimulate the economy, you cut taxes perhaps for everybody a certain amount, or you give rebates or something, but to cut taxes for the wealthy and put most of that deficit into tax cuts for the wealthy is not the efficient way to stimulate the economy. That's just baloney.
I think you got a trickle-down effect that they've been talking about, and I think over time you're going to see the benefits to the whole economy. And it's not only looking at the rich, the medium, and the low income, but I think the country as a whole. And I think you're starting to see the economy come back very strong, as Earlene had mentioned. And I think a lot of it has to do with some of the early actions the Republican president took.
No, if you're talking about trickle-down economy, then that's just truly amazing to me, because it's astounding, because trickle-down theory of economics has been debunked during the Reagan administration. It didn't work. So. His budget director, Stockdale, finally conceded that it didn't work. And trickle-down economics doesn't work here. We have a better economy now than we did a couple years ago. But if you're running a $500 billion or $400 billion deficit, you ought to have something going on.
Well, I think you're also fighting a war, and you've got a lot of expenses involved in there that are causing some of those large increases.
First time we ever cut taxes while we're fighting a war.
Well,
don't forget, 1% of the population pays most of the taxes. So you have to look at that, how it's distributed throughout.
And 1% of the population gets a vast percentage of the total wealth of this country, too. So, of course, they need to pay most of the taxes.
Well, you don't want to go into class warfare, though.
Oh, I've heard that.
Class warfare is just not a good thing to do in America.
I'll tell you what,
do that.
Class warfare is guns in the street and revolution. To criticize a tax cut is not class warfare. That's just nonsense to say that. Excuse me, but that's nonsense to call it class warfare.
Okay, one quick round here, because we're out of time already. Karl Rove, not a big endorsement from the president yesterday. Is he still going to be around a week from now?
Hard to say, but I think it's looking bleak for him.
Earlene, quick yes or no answer.
I think he's going to be around, absolutely.
Unfortunately, he'll be around for a week. Give him a month. Maybe he won't be around in a month.
We'll be right back on Nevada Newsmakers after this.
Nevada Newsmakers, brought to you in part by the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center, the world's largest industrial park, the resort at Red Hawk, and the Peppermill family of casinos.
Here at the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center, water resources come from fresh, clean groundwater, approved by state permits. The water is pumped from wells to million-gallon storage tanks and then distributed to TRI companies. Another amenity is our investment in a state-of-the-art wastewater treatment plant. This disposal system converts waste to clean water for industrial applications. Welcome to the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center, the largest industrial park in the world, building economic prosperity for Nevada.
South Reno's hotspot for food, fun, and friends is the Tamarack Junction. Enjoy great food 24 hours a day in the Dining Car Restaurant. For a quick bite and the best sandwiches in town, it's the Whistle Stop Deli. And for the best appetizers and menu selections and a large variety of cocktails, beers, and martinis, it's Sully's Sports Bar, Grill, and Nightclub. The Tamarack Junction is your junction for fun. South Virginia and Amati Ranch Parkway.
Coming up next week, former Governor Bob List, State Senator Dina Titus, and Clay Jenkinson. We'll see you then.